According to James Murombedzi, officer in charge of African Climate Policy Center, while climate change is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, it has a far-reaching implication on all the other Sustainable Development Goals.
Climate change is SDG 13, and the whole objective of SDG 13 is to ensure that firstly we manage emissions in a way that allows development to continue, and secondly that we are also able to support adaptation to already occurring climate change. But beyond it being a specific SDG, the impact of climate change is a threat to the achievement of all other SDGs.
He went on to point out that the far-reaching development and economic implications that climate change has had on the African continent.
We feel the effects of climate change through precipitation or through temperature. Precipitation, either we get too much rain, which results in flooding. We've seen several disasters across the continent in the last couple of years, or too little rain, which results in droughts, desertification, and so on. And temperature also leads to different types of problems. Climate change is also a threat to infrastructure, to energy generation, to agriculture. Most African economies are dependent on climate-sensitive sectors. And so climate change has got huge implications for the sustainable development of our continent.
It is, however, not all doom. Murombedzi goes on to say there is a silver lining to that cloud, given that responding to climate change presents opportunity for the African economies.
Responding to climate change also creates opportunities, opportunities for doing things differently. We recognize that Africa is still at a relatively early phase of development in infrastructure. We can avoid many of the mistakes that were made by more developed economies. We can avoid investing in carbon-intensive infrastructure. We can climate-proof the new infrastructure that we are going to be building. And we can also create new business opportunities and innovations in doing things better. So in other words, Africa has the opportunity to leapfrog to greener economies without necessarily going through a brown phase.
For this to happen, African countries need to invest in climate information services. To this regard, Dr. Muhammad Bamba, Senior Scientist Climate Modeling, Climate Change, WASCAL, noted that the information gathered by climate information services comes in handy in helping countries to do their economic planning.
Well, the socio-economic benefit can be many. A wiser model that we just discussed 2 days ago showed that if a country invests in CIS, it can gain more benefit than if they didn't really invest in it. So I'll take the sector which is mostly evident, which is agricultural sector. So the farmer that has to deal with dry spells and intense precipitation to avoid waterlogging, for example. Having this information well ahead will help him to plan, for example, right? And then find solutions to deal with this effect before they actually come. For example, if you're dealing with medium-term climate change, like the next 10, 15 years or 20 years, so if you have climate information, you can then plan for, let's say, some species, crop species, which are what we call climate crops ready, right? Climate ready crops. So that's what we call it. And these climate ready crops are more resilient to climate change, and of course they help to increase agricultural productivities. And this, of course, CIS will help you to do that. For example, give you different information for the different sectors. So you can find out which sector do you have to invest for more productivity, right? So I can actually suggest is city officials that have to plan for their infrastructure, right, to avoid loss and damages. So CIS can help them to find the best way to do that.
Further to this, Murombedzi says it's equally a high time the conversation on climate change is brought down to the community level, given that they are the most impacted by climate change.
But yes, I agree with you. You also need to mobilize local communities, local governments, and other stakeholders such as civil society, researchers, and scientists because the management of climate cannot in fact be the responsibility of states alone. Everyone has to be involved. Local communities experience climate change in their daily lives. They are the most impacted by climate change in many different ways. And they are also doing something about it without the assistance of anyone. They are adapting their livelihoods, their agricultural systems, their distribution system, and so on. But of course, as you can imagine, the problem is so big that you also need interventions from governments, from civil society. You need finance, you need technology, and you need capacity. And there are many initiatives that have been developed and that are currently under implementation, which seek to support the local adaptation activities.
As the curtains finally fall on CCDA 7, it is imperative that action will be taken on all the deliberations reached if the continent is to achieve sustainable development. For BrandPlus TV Business News, I am Elsa Atieno.